Hello, everybody. Today is October 28th, 2016, and happy Friday to everyone out there. And Halloween is just around the corner. I want to show you a game from Linares tournament in Spain from 1999 between a young Veselin Topalov with the white pieces and a young, in prime, in form, Vassily Ivanchuk with the black pieces. Now, 1999 was must have been a good year for Immortal Games against Topalov because many of you are familiar with the famous game from 1999, Kasparov Topalov, in which Topalov was on the losing side of a brilliancy, one of the great games of all time and probably Gary Kasparov's immortal, even though he had many, many great games. That game, Kasparov Topalov from 1999, has been annotated dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Um, Here's a lesser known game from 1999, but also spectacular. So enjoy. Again, Topalov has the white pieces, Ivanchuk the black pieces. And I want to say also that this game, let me make a move because people be like, hey, he's just talking, he's not moving the pieces. All right, this game, I would say like the main theme of this game is having what to do with the lead in development. And it's funny because principles apply from amateur all the way up to grandmaster level, and these players were in the top 10 in the world at the time. And the game really is that simple. Is what to do with the lead in development. So Topalov started out with knight f3, c5, which is a Sicilian invitation by Ivanchuk. Topalov decides to play c4 instead of e4, which go into the Sicilian, and now you have a symmetrical English variation. Knight c6 is played, and we see basically black is playing on the dark squares here, and white is playing on the light squares. d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and e6. So, what can we take out of this opening? All right. Well, here we can see that white has more space from the outset, and that's not the end all be all. It's just just an observation here that I want to make. White has more space in the position, but black is going to create counterplay, or his strategy basically consists of creating counterplay on these diagonals. This diagonal, right, G1 to A7, and also this A5, E1 diagonal with this queen and bishop. Because we can see that if there is any slight weaknesses or vulnerability in black's position, in white's position rather, it will be on those dark square diagonals. Okay, so Topalov plays the move G3. Now, more common is just knight C3 here. What is G3? G3 is a little more flexible in that it keeps the option of meeting bishop B4 check with bishop D2. So it's kind of a cat and mouse thing going on. So G3 was played, bishop B4 check, and he plays knight C3 anyway. So he doesn't use the idea of bishop D2. Queen A5 by Ivanchuk. Now he's threatening to win a pawn after bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, queen a3 check, and he's definitely going to come up with the piece. So now, some of you might say, well, black shouldn't be moving this queen around so early. This is one of those cases where these top players know when to break certain rules. The rules are for us on the lower levels. to keep us, safe. But these top players, they know the times when they can violate these quote unquote rules of chess. And here, what it does, Queen A5, it interferes with White's easy development. Because White would like to just play Bishop G2 castle and just keep it moving and attack the D6 square and keep that D pawn backwards. I'll play knight BD5, threatening to hop into that square and just keep it moving. And by threatening the pawn and threatening the check and winning a piece, rook on A1 and also the knight on D4, it interferes with White's development. So here it's valid to bring the queen out early. So knight DB5. So protecting against the threat, and also with the idea of hopping into D6. Now Ivanchuk's next move is very nice. He just plays D5. So he kills that idea of knight D6 right away, because now bishop will capture on D6. And he fights for the center. He hits the pawn on C4, which is not protected. A3. Now, interesting. It's consistent. He wants to remove that bishop so that he can capture on D5 and also possibly have access to D6. But the thing is if you notice, the rook on A1 is unprotected right now. So A3 is really not a threat at this point. It might be a threat in a move or so, but not right now. So perhaps just bishop F4, and maybe after bishop F4, which has the idea of knight C7 check, of course, perhaps E5, blocking that, and bishop D2, when both D takes C4 and D4, knight D5, lead to some unclear complications. So after D takes C4, for instance, A3, and now it's a threat to the bishop, because the rook is now protected by the queen. So after bishop takes C3, knight D6 check, in between move, or Zwischenzug, king F8, bishop takes with tempo on the queen, queen C5, bishop G2, and the game is far from over or decided. But I personally like White's game here, White's position. So that's a possibility. Instead, back to the game, A3 was played by Topalov. So bishop takes C3, and B takes C3. Now, if knight takes C3, black can either play D4, B4, and again exploiting the fact that the rook is unprotected on A1. Knight takes B4, A takes B4, queen to A1, knight B5 with the threat of knight C7. And this is unclear because White has got a nice lead in development accumulating, and the queen is kind of misplaced on A1. And black has problems dealing with the threats to D6 and C7 here. And white holds the bishop here. So it's not exactly a slam dunk. Another possibility is D takes C4. And that's okay because the knight check on D6 is no longer possible. So again, back to the game. After bishop takes, Topalov played B takes C3. And Ivanchuk just played knight F6, seemingly just ignoring the idea of knight D6 uh, knight d6 check. Right? He just raised knight f6. Knight to f6. Now, what's the idea behind this? Knight f6, knight d6, king e7, just attack the knight. Knight takes e8 and rook ac8. And even though black's king is not in his natural position, so to speak, on g8, he's ahead in development, and his king is safe, by the way, and the other rook is ready to swing out to d8. So again, these players know when to break certain rules here, and it's very logical. Especially that's a good line. So knight f6, bishop g2. Topalov doesn't even play the check. Castles, and queen b3 is played. White would love the castle, but however, just after castling, d takes c4 just drops the pawn. So what to do? And if c takes d5, knight takes d5. And then the problem now is the problem for white now is you have this knight on b5 that's just hanging, and then c3, the c3 pawn is vulnerable. So c takes d5 isn't effective, and castle is not effective. So this is Topalov's solution to the problem is he plays queen to b3. However, this doesn't really assist in his development. And look at black's development. So black is taking the lead in development here. So now, why do I say at the beginning this is a game about development? Is because one of the major rules when we talk about having a lead in development is that when somebody has a lead in development, what do? You open up the game. Because that's the only way to exploit your lead in development is open up lines, diagonals, and files and ranks for your pieces. So Ivanchuk plays in this spirit. So he plays d takes c4, queen takes c4, and now e5. You see how e5 opened up the line for the bishop on c8? Now the bishop can go to e6, attacking the queen, right? Gaining more time. g4, and now the rooks will be able to go to the d file. So all of this happened as a result of opening lines. So d takes c4, queen takes c4, e5, and look at that. Now you have the d file and the bishop to e6 on the menu coming up. Right, that one move, d takes c4, improved black's position by leaps and bounds. And the opening up of the position will always favor the player with the lead in development. So knight d6, bishop e6. Notice that Ivanchuk is not worried about knight takes b7, queen d3. And at this point, I mean, white is kind of hanging on by a thread. So, for instance, if queen d3, natural looking move would be like rook a d8. But the problem with rook a d8 and rook f d8 is then knight takes b7 works. So now, at this point, how do we keep the initiative going for black? Right? We can't do those two natural moves. How does Ivanchuk keep the initiative going? He has a lead in development, and he's trying to exploit that. You know, so basically, you can't let white rest here. You got to find a way to keep the fire burning. We don't want the fire to go out. We want to find a way to keep the fire burning, because if white castles and plays say the dark square bishop out somewhere, you know, the pawns are symmetrical, and it's probably just an even game. So Ivanchuk plays e4, hitting the queen. Okay, opening the position even further. So now White gives up his beautiful knight. It's on d6, and knight takes e4 happens. So let's look at some other moves. Let's say he just tries to move the queen, right, instead of capturing the pawn. If queen c2, ouch, knight d4. And notice that the pawn cannot capture the knight on d4 because the queen on a5 is pinning the c3 pawn. So that's a hurtful continuation. And then notice the bishop on e6, um, which allows a knight access to b3 if need be, or the bishop can come to b3. So queen c2, out of the question. Next, queen e3. Same type of deal. Knight g4. Queen d2. Rook a d8 works now. And finally, bishop takes e4. White giving up his prize bishop. And then you just simply snatch that off the board and play that. And you see the initiative just remaining with black. So he decided after Topalov decided after all of those choices, I might as well just grab a pawn. For my troubles, I might as well be a pawn up. So knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook a d8, queen c2, trying to get the queen out of dodge. So for instance, if queen e3, then rook fe8, and white is, not in a good spot there. So queen c2, notice the threat, right? The queen and bishop battery on the h7 pawn. Now, again, we're fighting for we have a lead in development. We're fighting for the initiative here. So we don't have time. It's black. If you want to win this game, you don't have time to be playing moves like h6. Right? Trying to just hold on to the pawn or playing g6 like some type of defensive move. You have to recognize these type of positions. You have to recognize, okay, I'm castled. I got all my pieces except that one rook in the game. So you have to keep pressing, keep moving. You can't play a move like G6 here. A lot of players would play that. A move like G6 or H6, just, I don't want to lose that pawn on H7 with check. Ivanchuk played knight D4. Learn from that. Again, I showed you this variation a move or so back. The pawn on C3 cannot capture the knight because of the pin established by the queen on A5. So now Topalov plays queen b2, and he's defended great. And now he wants to castle. That's the next move coming up. Castle. Now what? So now Topalov is also threatening the pawn on b7. Again, you think Ivanchuk is thinking about that? Nope. He's thinking about, okay, this guy's gonna castle and consolidate, and after he castles, I'm gonna have to move this knight out the way. So it's like, now, how do you continue? How do you continue? You would love to play a move like Bishop H3, right? But the but say after, for instance, Bishop D2, right? Say after Black plays Bishop H3, Bishop D2, then the knight has to move. So there's some serious things that have to be considered here. What did Ivanchuk do? Right? It's one of his greatest games. What did he do here? Man, this dude played knight takes e2. Man, that's finding, That's why I like chess so much. Just finding these kind of moves over the board against real strong players. I mean, Topalov. I mean, he probably lost some hair, like right at this moment. Just wow. Because a guy plays that against you, it's either he's right or he's lost. So this forces the king to stay in the center now. Another move black could have tried was bishop c4, right? Putting some pressure on the e pawn, but then the queen b4, kind of forces consolidation time. Forces a trade. Rook fe8 could have been played, right? But then castle, bishop h3, c takes, bishop takes f1, bishop f3. So what's the problem here is that this is one of the other rules when you're behind to follow, one of the rules that we often are taught when you're behind in development, right? It's a common method. When you're behind in development, you return the material that you took earlier in order to bring out your pieces. So for instance, say you accept the gambit early in the game, and say for instance the Evans gambit, in the Roy Lopez or something like that, and you go up 2 pawns, but with your position is bound up. Many times in those games, you can return 1 pawn back, or sometimes both of the pawns, in order to get your pieces into the game. And sometimes while the opponent is recapturing his sacrifice material, he actually loses the advantage in development at certain times. So that's why this position is better for white. He returns the material and he gets his pieces out. So this is getting back to the position. So this is why this move is just something else. Knight takes e2. He just will not let Topalov get. He just needs one tempo. He just will not let him get it. If queen b4, right, trying to apply the method, right, trying to give back the material, trade down, give back the material. Because remember, white is up a pawn, so he can give back a pawn. But here, there's a powerful move that Ivanchuk has, and I'm sure he saw it. Knight takes c3. Can you see what the problem is? If queen takes queen, right? Queen takes a5, then this will be checkmate. So therefore, excuse me, Topalov played king takes e2. So now the king accepts the sacrifice, but he's stuck in the middle of the board now. Ivanchuk played rook fe8, and this is a good move. The rook on f8 goes exactly where it's obvious that it should go. So, for instance, the bishop could have been moved. So, for instance, bishop c4 check. But there's a couple of other places the bishop could go too. So, I read this in Hans Berliner's book, actually, The System. And basically he said, in a nutshell, I'm just paraphrasing, but that you move to the places where it's clear that the pieces should go first. So for instance, in this position, it's clear that the rook on the f file goes to e8. So you move that there before you move a piece that you're not sure about where it goes, because sometimes you need more information in the position to see where it goes. Like for instance, does this bishop go here? Does it go here? Does it go here? Perhaps you will want it to be here later to initiate some kind of pin, on this bishop. It's not clear yet. However, it's real clear that this rook goes here. So therefore, you should take that piece and put it there first. That's just food for thought. So, for instance, here's a line that was given by Vassily Ivanchuk, for instance. So if bishop c4 check, king f3, f5, bishop takes b7, bishop d5, king e2, bishop takes b7, queen takes b7. This is a long line he gave. Queen takes c3, bishop e3, queen c4 check, king e1, queen c3 with only a draw. Now, there's probably errors like in that line, but it's just an example that it might not be, it's better, excuse me, it's just an example that's better to move the piece that, it's obvious where it should go first. Here's rook fe8. So, Topalov goes for the trade that we spoke about earlier. Queen b4. Now, we know the pin is coming. So, if f3, trying to fortify that bishop, f5. And that's hard. That's hard on white right there. And you can see why the rook on e8, the bishop moves, there's all kind of discovered attacks coming. And if rook e1, right, maybe with the idea of getting the king out of there. Queen h5, king f1, bishop h3. And you see what I'm talking about. Now, if the bishop was over here, then the king would just scoot over to g1. But since the bishop remained on e6, now that this line happened, it's more clear that the bishop belongs in h3 now. So h3, king g1, and then rook takes e4. And that's another line from Ivanchuk. And of course, this rook cannot be captured because of the weaknesses on the back rank. Because the bishop is still on c1. So rook d1 mate or queen d1 mate would occur after rook takes e4. So Topalov played queen b4. He did the natural thing and offered a trade of queens. Ivanchuk did the natural thing in this position and declined the trade of queens. So queen h5 check, f3, f5 with the analogous position that we discussed already. And we can see with the rook opposed to the king on e2 that it's a dangerous position. And we always talk about this. If you follow my videos, I'm always talking about opposing the king or queen with the heavy pieces when you get a chance. It's always good to do stuff like that. Notice that the queen is in opposition also to the king. So rendering this pawn on f3 ineffective. So now, after f5, white is just put on desperation mode. Plays g4, queen h3. Ivanchuk just won't let up. Threat is queen g2. G takes f5. Bishop takes f5. There's the pin. He can also play this move, queen g2, right away, king e3, and just pick up the rook. Okay, so that's another way to win. But Ivanchuk just went, I felt like he took the natural route, just direct attack on the king. So bishop takes f5, queen c4 check, king h8, rook e1. And Ivanchuk finishes off in style, plays rook, takes e4 check. This forces white's hand because the king is checked and the queen is on prise. So the piece has to be captured. However, Topalov was forced to resign because after f takes e4, then bishop g4 check leads the mate. After king f2 and queen takes h2, it's mate in 1. Can you see it? If king e3, then simply queen g3 checks. And if king f1, then simply rook f8 is possible. And then after some type of interposition, say bishop f4, then rook takes f4 and it's mate. So, but even quicker than that, because I'm just going by eye, even quicker than that, if king f1, just bishop h3 is mate. So that is all she wrote. That was a fantastic game by Ivanchuk. Um, and fantastic example of to um, how to play a position where you gain a lead in development. And fantastic, just applying those old school principles. I love this move e5 and e4. Just that constant, pressure on the white position and never letting Topalov get settled down. But my friends, it's these type of moves that separate, the wheat from the chaff, and why the cream rises to the top. Because even with all those other moves like e4, e5, and e4, you have to, you have to find this move. If you don't find this move, then it's kind of like you blow the position, pretty much, and then you blow the possibility of a brilliant game. But just keeping that in mind that hey, I have a lead in development. This is what I have to do in order to exploit that lead in development. Then hopefully it'll help you find these great continuations. And Ivanchuk definitely understands and understood at the time that hey, I'm head in development. I can't let this guy just castle and consolidate. He has the two bishops and he has pressure on the position, namely on the B file and the B pawn, and he probably would come out better. So he did what he had to do. He sacrificed a piece and just played brilliantly. So I hope you enjoyed that game. As usual, please hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and leave comments. I like seeing the comments, even if it's like a smiley face or something like that, and suggestions. So anyway, I will see you on the next video shortly.